Hello everybody and welcome to the fifth video in our series of videos on ancient Rome. Today we look at another aspect of Roman life and another theme that crops up in history again and again. That theme is slavery. So to begin, we start with our learning outcomes. As always, you guys by the end of this presentation should know two ways someone could become a slave. You guys should know two jobs that a slave might have in ancient Rome. And finally, you should know what manumission and crucifixion mean. So first off, let's begin by defining what slavery is. Slavery is when a person is the legal property of another and is forced to obey them. Slavery had existed long before Rome became a powerful empire. There is evidence of it dating back centuries before Rome was even founded. However, the significant thing about Roman slavery is how much of it there was. Slaves were everywhere. They were omnipresent. It's hard to put a figure on how many slaves there were, but it's believed that somewhere between 10% and 33% of all the people living in Rome and its surrounding areas were slaves. That means 1 in every 10, or possibly even 1 out of every 3 people in Rome were slaves. So how did you become a slave? There were 4 main ways you could become a slave. We saw a few videos ago how Rome had defeated Carthage in the Punic Wars to begin its overseas empire. Up until then, Rome had only really ruled Italy. Well, within 120 years, they ruled all this land that you can see here, that's covered in pink. To conquer that land, they would march their legions to fight other armies. When they defeated the army they were fighting, they would take the land and enslave the army and whoever travelled with that army. The Roman army fought a lot of battles and enslaved a lot of people. Another way that you could become a slave would be simply to be born a slave. The child of a slave became a slave. They were the property of the slave's master. Uh, Another way, the third way, is remember, slavery became a business, which is a horrific thing to say, but it became a bigger and bigger business. And as it became bigger, slave traders or merchants would try to get as many slaves to trade as they could. So they would even kidnap people from one part of the empire and send them to another part of the empire where nobody would know that they had been free. And finally, as we saw last week, some babies, especially baby girls, were left on rubbish heaps to die. And while occasionally those babies would be taken by a slave merchant and raised to be slaves. The question then is, was there a way to become free? While it was possible for people to spend their whole life as a slave, there was also a way in which one could become free. And this was known as manumission. So manumission was being set free by your master through service or by paying for your freedom. You might ask then, why did these people stay as slaves? And the Romans tried to make sure that they didn't have too many strong slaves in the same place. So when they conquered these armies and took the prisoners of war, they tried to split them up. They also tried to put people who spoke different languages together so that they couldn't communicate. But their main tool was terror. Slaves could be flogged on a master's whim, and slaves had a special kind of execution. This was known as the crucifixion, which is an agonizing way to die. So then, what jobs did the slaves do? Most people think of slaves and they think they only did the tough manual labor. And while they did do the tough manual labor, working in fields or working in mines to enrich the Romans and feed the Roman army, they also did jobs like teaching and accounting. Some slaves were actually even better off than the poor plebeians, and some slaves even had their own slaves. Another job that the slaves had was gladiator fighting. We will look at gladiator fighting in a bit more detail in another video. But basically, just like we might go and watch a boxing match or an MMA fight, the Romans went to the Colosseum to watch gladiators fight to the death. One of the most famous of these Gladiators was a slave who started a slave revolt in 73 BCE. Spartacus was captured as a slave and he was trained in a ludus or a gladiator school. In 73 BCE, however, Spartacus had enough and him and his fellow gladiators staged a breakout from the ludus where they were being held. They hid in the mountains at Mount Vesuvius, and the Romans sent 3,000 troops to get the rebellious gladiators. However, Spartacus and his followers snuck down at night and killed the soldiers. The legend of Spartacus continued to grow and slaves flocked to him. He couldn't defeat the Romans in head-on battles, so he used guerrilla warfare tactics or hit-and-run tactics that defeated any of the legions that were sent to stop his rebellion. Again, as his legend grew, more and more slaves flocked to his side, and soon he had an army of 120,000 soldiers. Eventually, they did have an opportunity to escape Italy for freedom, but decided to stay to try to take revenge on Romans and enrich themselves. Eventually, however, the Roman legions caught up with them because the Romans never give up. So eventually, they drove Spartacus and the rebel slaves down to the south of Italy, where they were defeated by a commander known as Licinius Crassus, who was at the time the wealthiest man in Rome. Hopefully we'll have a chance to look at Crassus because he's a pretty interesting character in himself. Spartacus died in a battle in 71 BCE, and 6,000 of his followers were captured, and they were crucified, lined up all along the Appian Way, the main road to Rome. 6,000 crucifixions lined along the road as a warning to anyone who tried to rebel against Roman power. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So you guys should know 2 ways someone could become a slave. You guys should know 2 jobs that a slave might have in ancient Rome, whether that is working in a field, in a mine, as a teacher, as an accountant, or as a gladiator. And finally, you guys should know what the terms manumission and crucifixion mean. Manumission being how a master would set their slave free, and crucifixion being the method of execution chosen for slaves. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something good from this video.